There is a thing that I like to do from time to time, and that is predicting the future. I'm not the best at it, at least as far as being correct and what came true, but I'd like to think that I am reasonably good at what should have been true. Today on our prediction docket, solo leveling is quite a big thing, isn't it? Quite a popular show for lots of reasons. Both good and bad. It's got a lot of fans, but it's also got a lot of haters. It's shut down Crunchyroll a few times, and I think it's fair to say that it has obtained a position of being needed to be watched, just so that you can follow along with everyone's conversations about it, even if you don't personally like it. The thing is, when something gets super popular, like solo leveling in this case, the next question is, well, what's going to be big next? Ignoring, of course, the dozens of people who instead ask, hey, how can we do that again? And again, and again. But worse. And in this case, it's a bit hard to tell what the next thing might be because all of the obvious routes have all been mined dry. Solo leveling is an action fantasy anime with RPG mechanics given to its world, but more explicitly its protagonist. But that's not something that can just be plopped into another narrative setting and expect it to work. Countless isekai are trying that. And you might then ask, did they try and fail? I would respond, they tried and died. Okay, then what else could we copy that? Well, if we want to get a bit more meta, solo leveling is based off a Korean manhwa. Surely there are other popular manhwa that are ripe for adaptation and the next big thing is already out there, right? Well, possibly, but also if all it took to make a popular show now was to just have it be adapted from a Korean writer instead of a Japanese one for its anime, well then both Tower of God and The God of High School would have done exceptionally better than they did. I mean, I could be boring and say that the popularity of solo leveling is just a product of its time, taking a reasonably decent world and characters and just handing that to an animation studio that dressed it up to the nines and gave it a production value that it probably was unworthy of. But I can't argue with the results. It is an entertaining show, but that is unhelpful in trying to determine the future. What we can do, though, is try to come up with the best combination of things that may be attributed to what made solo leveling a success, and hopefully also find something with its own unique aspect that solo leveling doesn't have. Like maybe a protagonist who is more than an emotional blank slate for the viewer to imprint themselves on. That'd be nice, for once. So I'm going to pick out a Korean manhwa, one with RPG mechanics, and having done that, I'm sure that if it was given to a competent studio with a production budget higher than it deserves, it would do absolute gangbusters. Today, I'm talking to you about The Great Estate Developer. This is a manhwa that's available over on Webtoon, and at the time of this video's recording, no adaptation has been greenlit of any kind. And I want to say that's an absolute shame. Now, I'm going to describe this story to you. And I bet so much, actually, that nothing about this narrative on paper is going to sound interesting. I guarantee it, actually, but that's my point. So The Greatest Estate Developer follows this guy. He was a Korean civil engineering student who fell asleep while reading a fantasy novel before waking up in said fantasy novel as the belligerent, drunken side character named Lloyd. Sound familiar so far? Good. Lloyd has been granted this gift by a being known as the Absolute, who seemed to just kind of toss him into this world for kicks, and then continues to talk to and taunt our protagonist using pop-up prompts like a gaming UI that only he can see. The Absolute has tasked Lloyd with achieving a positive relationship rating with key characters from the original story, despite him inhabiting a body who, at the start, is universally hated and despised for his arrogant attitude and general unpleasantness. Thankfully, as is traditional with so many isekai stories, he has a bit of a cheat skill, in that he used to be a civil engineering student. He was also Korean, so he was drafted into their military for a time, and he has actually built a house by hand before. So hey, now that he's in this faux Regency era fantasy world, would the citizens here not appreciate buildings and houses made with modern amenities that are still technically possible given the technological limitations? Could he not just make a fortune with this knowledge and save both his own character's reputation and that of his family? I mean, he's also got the future sight because, he has read further in the novel than he's currently living, so he knows at least what's supposed to happen to a lot of the characters. Most of it's not good. It is apparently a very tragic novel that our protagonist has found himself sucked into, but that can be great, right? Now he knows all of the problems, and he can sidestep them, and then everything will be happy, right? Well, yes, but also no. Lloyd does not want to live a basic, slow life. Yes, he needs to clean up the reputation of his character so that he's not despised, but he's not doing that so he can just be forgotten about and live in obscurity. No, he wants people to like him so that he can put them to work, so that he can make money. So if you ask why I think this would be an amazing adaptation, despite the fact that on paper, there is very little about this story that seems to be anything more than the multitude of isekai slop that's already in production, say nothing of what has been released, this is because the Great Estate developer has Lloyd. Well, I mean, technically it has Suho Kim, which is the actual name of our protagonist, but he's in the body of Lloyd, and this is what gives the story legs. Lloyd's story is one about a very intelligent, yet conniving, mostly self-serving, morally ambiguous character who loves scheming from the shadows and dramatically performing for the audience of just himself. I mean, really for us, but it's not like us, we the audience, as a character. This is a story where humor is a highlight, and while humor is subjective, here they rely heavily on a more slapstick, kind of meme-friendly style of humor, which makes it just, in general, great. Chances are, if you've been around the internet in the last 2 or 3 years or so, you might have seen one of Lloyd's many faces used as a reaction to something, because he's just been given that kind of a face. His expressions are a character of their own and do so much of the heavy lifting to make his character memorable and something worth reading. The plot is, well, it's okay. It can be boiled down to Lloyd builds some houses and lets his barren family continue to be landlords and not just, bankrupt ones. The building itself isn't what's interesting, and thankfully, the narrative is very self-aware of that, using Lloyd's reading his engineering textbook from memory as a way to help a character with insomnia fall asleep. Well, what about city development? Well, that's only as interesting as what it helps Lloyd do, as far as, his next thing, whatever that ends up being. Want to go take down a corrupt knight with a shovel? Sure, let Lloyd be Lloyd. That's what this is about. Yeah, he could let the actual protagonist of the novel take care of things, but where's the fun in that? Why not get said protagonist to train you in sword combat to fix your mostly broken and squishy body? I mean, that's some plus points to the plot, isn't it? Let's not make the 90 billionth guy who got jacked just because he had the ability to open a stat window given to him. Let's have Lloyd just get a little fit, because then he can convince the real main character to train him, even if that means running laps and taunting him every time you come around. Because again, Lloyd be Lloyd. So the quote-unquote real main character of the novel that our protagonist finds himself in is Javier, or Javier, or Javert. It's a French name, I'm not good with France. He is a cool as a cucumber powerful swordsman who Lloyd's family has hired to be a bodyguard. He's supposed to have some tragic stuff happen to him after, Lloyd and his whole family kicks the bucket. But since this time around, Lloyd has absolutely zero intention of going quietly, Javier is literally dragged along for the ride, protecting Lloyd as he makes fun of loan sharks and discovers colonies of giant ants who can then only be defeated by lighting up some methane. If I was to point to what I could uncharitably call the worst part of the story, it's how the novel, within the narrative, gets kind of eviscerated very easily. So once again, our protagonist does get teleported into a world of a novel he read, and that novel, best that I can understand, was just not very good. Maybe that's the point. We don't know much about the godlike being that has sent him here, the absolute. Maybe he's the vengeful type, like a bunch of others that we've seen elsewhere, who has the mentality of, well, if it's really that bad of a story, then why don't you go fix it for me then? But every time Lloyd brings it up, when he brings up what's supposed to happen, he does it in a way that it's it sounds interesting for about half a second. And that's enough to, move the plot forward. But also, if you think about it for more than half a second, you realize that the original novel could not have had much of an interesting plot. Thankfully, it doesn't matter though, because we aren't following that plot. We aren't following Javier as he goes through tragedy. No, we're following Lloyd, which is far more entertaining. Now, I can honestly say that I don't expect this story to ever get adapted. It's sad, but it's true. Even if it does, I expect that the gods are going to laugh at us and will instead adapt the light novel instead of the webtoon version, which would be a travesty because the light novel has a very different, i.e. safe, way of depicting Lloyd. So much so that as a character, he would then be indistinguishable from most other isekai protagonists. Heck, the way that he is portrayed in the webtoon is the reason why he stands out from literally everyone and everything else. He's not just built to be some generic guy who can resemble whatever J or K-pop idol is currently popular at the moment. He's made to resemble a freaking titan for no other reason than why the heck not? If you have been enjoying Solo Leveling, but want to see what kind of entertainment you can get for a manhwa that leans more into like a comedy aspect of the medium rather than a constant must get stronger and break all of the things manhwa, then give this one a shot. Also because, well, water is good. Lloyd is water. Therefore, Lloyd is good. Thank you for your time. Shout out to the supporters on Patreon who make everything on this channel even possible, especially patrons like Hector Montemayor, Aiden, Siri Yamako, Rifen Bonaparte, Omar Showman, and Ross Emerson, who we cannot do any of this without. Thank you all very much, and until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.